Give 1 more minute since there's people at the door. Hi, everybody. It's been a long weekend. Y'all made a choice to be here, and that means a ridiculous amount to me. I'll be honest, one of my mentors, my main mentor, just walked up to me and I was like, do I just tell everyone I'm not going to do it so they all can just go there? Like, so I'm honest, so no, not in a bad way. It was more like, okay. But you reminded me that you all made a choice to be here today. So I'm excited to share my work with you. And I hope it's something that will help wrap our heads around what we all know is going on in another room in some ways. But is there any way to shut the door or just not yell to people on trying to have this awful moment? Thank y'all. So again, thank y'all for joining me. It's my absolute honor to be here. I also do seriously thank all of my colleagues who have helped with all of the work that we've done for this. It was 2 years really, but there are colleagues in the room and it's actually more than 20 years. So that part's really, really exciting. So I just want to say I will do my best to represent. Before starting, I just want to clarify that this presentation does not represent any potential conflicts of interest. I also don't maintain any significant affiliations beyond the organizations demonstrated on this slide, which range from really active member through advisory board member or one employment position. Now that we're all like a small tight-knit group, I'll get more personal than I thought I would. So I am actually a senior consultant with Kava Consulting. I recently stepped down as CEO. I think that puts me in a better position to continue to support so many of our team members that are managing a lot of different things, including bad technology. All right, I'll just not talk that much. How's that? So, not sure if anyone noticed. We kind of had a rough couple of years. Anyone with me on that? No, maybe just a little. Okay, cool. However, I've decided to start with way more smarter people than me. All right. So, as Pinker recently said, periods of crisis often emphasize socially significant problems and set the occasion for scientific advancements. Interestingly, it was all the way in the 50s when Cantor, I'm always scared of this now, described how under these conditions, previously unattended or unknown problems can gain heightened awareness. And really what this does is affect scientific systems in a way that could often yield new forms of technology. He didn't say the really part, I was just summarizing for you there. The quote that you're reading up here though, that's not a Cantor or a Pinker, it's a mock quote that summarizes a bunch of different leaders. And I would say probably, unfortunately, at least a dozen over what's now, as of this weekend, 4 relatively large scale conferences. And this is what I've heard many of them saying. And so I have to kind of have us all take a step back and say, well, is this an accurate statement? And if so, are we facing this risk? And if so, again, what are some of the potential risk indicators that we should maybe be looking at to see if we will be obsolete in 5 years? All right, I'll give you one risk indicator, clearly impacting behavior. Our largest membership organization releasing this statement just last week, right? So here's a risk indicator, right? So indeed, these are unprecedented times, no doubt. The field of behavior analysis, but in particular, behavior analytic practice, or ABAI, is coming under criticism from the broader community for lack of mutually agreed upon best practice standards and related accountability measures. Now, this is especially concerning, of course, given the CDC's report of a 2-fold increase in the diagnosis over the last 2 decades, right? You pair that with the BACB numbers that we're all familiar with, which is that 50% of current practitioners have been certified within the last 5 years. And really all that means is that a lot of people looking to get support are going to have the programs that they're experiencing be developed and supervised by somebody who is a relatively new practitioner and likely has very limited support from what I like to call more seasoned clinicians. I've been working on the best language, and then I feel like I have to make a joke about liking things with seasoning and spicy. I don't know. Anyway. All right. At the same time, these new practitioners, right? This is happening when we're all facing actively, dynamically changing practice landscape. So new behavior analytic practitioners are going to be required to engage in case conceptualization without really, I'll say, robust and comprehensive established practice standards. We have some good stuff out there, so I don't want to claim we don't, but we have to be able to say that they're going to be faced with having to engage in case conceptualization without robust, mutually agreed upon established practice standards during what we're looking at here, right? So this dynamically changing landscape includes, but is not limited to, an influx in private equity. Again, behavior analytic practice, ABA, not the rest of the domains. Wouldn't that be nice? Hey, EAB people would be very happy. I'm just having fun now since no one's here, sorry. And the related efforts to streamline those services. Transition to managed healthcare, which is really what I'm talking about when I talk about medical necessity. I don't think the dialogue needs to go beyond the fact that we all know that medical necessity is at the point of diagnosis with autism and also some other diagnoses depending on the payer landscape, right? But I'm talking about what that means in terms of us shifting to the medical model and related necessary adjustments. We're also facing more regulatory requirements, right? We have increased standards from the BACB. We have no new accreditation bodies coming on board as well. That used to just be for graduate training programs, now it's for providers. And of course, we have increased opposition to ABAI. And I want to emphasize here, though, that it's separately potential misconceptions, all right? Because it is not the case that all opposition is based on misconception. And I spoke about that a little earlier today, and I'll give a code at the end of the day if you're more interested in my comments on that end. In the end, you just saw the last line, which was that little down in that barrel, right? What was I saying? I was saying our job is to improve quality of life. And I'm here to talk to you guys today about decreasing the risks associated with us achieving that improvement in quality of life. My purpose in doing this is real clear. It's to protect the integrity of behavior analytic professional practice and to assure a client's rights to effective treatment. This statement has been around a long, long time. I bolded a couple words for you. Therapeutic, personal welfare. I always said when I was a professor that if the term is not redefined in Cooper, Kasner, or insert whoever you're most comfortable with here, then we're going to go on back to Merriam-Webster, all right? Because all words have clearly defined meanings and not meaning, careful, that was a little bit much. But it's important, especially when I'm facing people saying, well, there's no clearly defined guidelines for making sure that we're protecting against harm. No, let's look at the definition of the fact that we're required to produce a therapeutic environment. Let's look at the definition when we're talking about protecting welfare. When you look at what these things mean, we are obligated to protect against harm, bottom line. And we have been for a long time. I'm not saying that we're not doing that all the time. I just want to acknowledge that. So again, my primary purpose is to make sure that we are protecting the integrity of behavior analysis. And more importantly, in some ways, but I feel these come one in hand, what's the term, right? Ensure clients' rights to effective behavioral treatment. I'll do it across these three areas. I'm going to briefly go through state of affairs for professional practice right now. I'm going to get a little call to action with you on what we're calling socially meaningful case conceptualization. And I'll briefly touch on our current related research and spend some time on the implications. Breaking it down like this on all the sections. I apologize if there are anyone that is not a visual a learner here in the moment. We will make sure to release this and we'll provide supplementary topics because I do not necessarily always say what's on my slide and what is on my slide is important. If that's challenging for anyone in the audience and you need to turn to a friend and help them, I will not yell at you for talking, and some of my former students in the room would think that I would, so that's all I want. In the end, I'm highlighting that I'm trying to talk about risk here. And we're talking about risk to successful ABA, which to me means risk to ensuring that we are improving quality of life. What can I say? I'm all about risk, all right? So like I said, it's been a rough few years, lots of bad stimulus pairings going on. But hey, this image indicates that you can all sleep better at night knowing that you're not stuck being married to me, because these are the kinds of emails that I'm sending to my husband and then forwarding to other students, I believe, former students at 11 o'clock at night when I'm like, I got it. All right, so you're not stuck in my little world right now, but I thought I'd be honest and just show you how I was looking at me. I'm like, look, we are constantly at risk. We face risk, we choose risk. We as a collective society, regardless of those who we are protecting and ensuring that we are protecting their welfare and their well-being right now, we're all choosing risk and we are making risk equal our quality of life. That is just a fact. And so what I'm trying to talk about today is really taking that as an opportunity to say, well, hold on, maybe it's time then for us to look at how we're helping people across ages and across diagnoses, and in particular autism, because of the payer and provider landscape and the medical model, and shift things. So that's what I'm going to talk about, because in the end, my colleagues and I realized that although our work here was somewhat inspired by the crisis, we quickly realized that this is not only not just applicable to the crisis, but extends far beyond it and needs to. And then our next realization was risk is not just about procedural risk. So what do I mean by that? I'm a big fan of the search option in PDF for any document. I love it. These things were not around. I was in college when they were talking about this new thing called email, just, It was really hard though. Anyway, if you search our last BACD guidelines, 2014, you look for the term risk, it comes up 11 times. You search it in this one, it comes up 23. I am not saying an increase in frequency necessarily indicates any kind of value, all right? But I think it's interesting, especially when we realize ABA-based assessment and treatment requires measurement of both behavior and environment. So in other words, if the potential risks to quality of life are defined as behavior excesses and deficits, a behavior analytic practitioner is not only required to operationally define the behavior, but they also need to define the environment that's maintaining that behavior, the variables that are contributing to it, right? However, given that we do not have a common standard for which to engage in socially meaningful case conceptualization, and specifically with respect to evaluating appropriate related service recommendations, we need to realize that when tackling these crucial issues, we're at an increased likelihood for miscommunication, right? And this could result in revoking services prematurely, extending services unnecessarily, right? And even potential policy changes resulting from a lack of appropriate accountability measures. Why am I saying all this? I know it's small words, it's everything on this slide is very important. This is the first page, but I'm gonna take you into the last sentence. It says very clearly, in all instances of interpreting and applying the code, behavior analysts should put compliance with the law and clients' interests first by actively working to maximize the desired outcomes and minimize risk. Take a moment with that. There's another code that talks about the risk associated with our procedures. That code very specifically says that you need to conduct a risk-benefit analysis when you're introducing a procedure. Of course, hopefully everybody knows that. Stephanie Peterson, Dr. Peterson, Western Michigan, amazing work, risk-benefit analysis, whether or not you should conduct an experimental FA. Wonderful. That is a procedure, and that's a great thing. That is not what this sentence is talking about. Like I just said, there's another code talking about that. Let's read the sentence again together. It took me a while too. All right. By first actively working to maximize desired outcomes and minimize risk. That's risk to desired outcomes, not risk to harm given a procedure. That's included in that. I'm pretty sure desired outcomes don't involve harm giving a procedure. I can call crazy, but stay with me here, all right? Stay with me. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this. I awkwardly insisted that, and I'm so sorry that you don't give me an introduction because I just was like, this is crazy. Like, what's happening right now? So I apologize. I did not have my bio to be given. I'll give you a fun part of my bio. Most of my publications, these are not just journals I've read, are under the name Rachel Tarbox. The rest of their places are places that I have worked or held advisory board positions. I show this only to demonstrate that I've had a unique career because it goes across different aspects of the field of behavior analysis. So I've been in academia. I was a practitioner. I was the director of research for the largest autism agency in the world. She likes to say like that a lot. I've been fortunate enough to serve in positions including the CalABA March 2020 conference chair. So let me tell you how much fun this moment is. 23 years after my first ABAI, I finally am an invited speaker. Yeah, okay. Anyway, so it's been a really fun couple of years. I say all of this because I thought about it last actually when ABAI did the online conference. Those of you who are familiar with risk-related research, I just mentioned Dr. Peterson, she presented last year. Dr. Reed was presenting. Luckily, I know him pretty well, and I had to email him afterwards and say, I cannot believe we've been in it with this pandemic. My organization, my former organization, if you're not familiar with it, it's not former, they're doing a good job without me. We also operate community living homes, also a fun thing to do in a pandemic, by the way, as a small family owned and operated company. And in that time, we were going through ABAI, and so I think we were working on this risk work, and I just hadn't stepped back. The images on the right, I'm not gonna get into. When I did my dissertation, which are those images, I was even doing mathematical equations. I had to email Dr. Reed and laugh and say, I totally didn't realize till this moment that even my doctoral dissertation nearly 20 years ago was in risk. I know that sounds pathetic. I did know what my dissertation was in, let me clarify. Those of you who are familiar with work in EAB, I focused on self-control and impulsivity. So my work was SSR, LLR, and all down that path. So there's only a few people making the connection, but I wanted to just kind of point this out. This other image is real as well. It's a recent research lab that we have in our organization. And I put this up there and I was just sharing with people what I've kind of looked at as my process of presenting over the last 10, 15 years. I found myself being like, okay, no, it's a problem of the divide between science and practice. No, it's a problem between the academics and the practitioners. Oh no, wait. And then I just kind of keep coming back to, I don't think we all know what the definition of ABA is. And it actually was brought to my attention in a real emotional way 3 years ago when I was fortunate enough to kind of go to another side of our world that I don't usually work in, which was the advocacy area. And Lori Unum was kind enough to invite me to present at the Autism Law Summit. And I remember thinking, why am I getting these invites? We published a little bit, but I'm getting invites suddenly like 10 years ago, right? Because that Dr. Rachel Tarbox girl was really important. Anyways, I'm getting all these invites and I'm like, this is interesting, you know? I'm like, all right, I'm excited to I knew our organization was unique because we provided services across ages. So I figured that was it. I knew a lot of people knew that I had founded the first PhD program in ABA in California. So I was like, all right, I guess that still means something. You know, I'm like, I don't know. Then I get to the Law Summit and I see some of the most influential people, if not the most influential people. And I say that with all due respect. And as a former ABAI Executive Council member and membership board coordinator as well, in the world of behavior analytic practice, and in particular for autistic people, because they were the lobbyists, the policymakers, the passionate people. And I suddenly realized why I was getting an invite. I was getting an invite because Lori's son, Ryan, turned 18. And it dawned on me that these are people that are really dedicated to ABA, love ABA, but might not know what it's supposed to look like over the ages. I'm going to get into that a little bit more for you today, but I just wanted to explain this story. And I believe that comes back to a problem with our understanding of what defines not only ABA, but the science of behavior analysis. So let's get to it. I said I would do it as quickly as I could here. They gave me 50 minutes. Number one, state of affairs for professional practice. Take it in. It's not a fun image to look at, but it's a reality. I'm not saying it's a bad thing, even though I say it's not fun to look at. What you see in the top there is a practitioner entering our field here, right? Okay, here we go. I'm going to go get my graduate education. And the graduate education institutions per accreditation guidelines are aiming for minimum eligibility. Yay! That's what they do. No one's denying that. It is what it is. Now we're going to move on and we're going to say you have your graduate degree that makes you eligible to pursue certification. Okay, cool. Here's our big bad certification body. What are they looking for? Minimum competency. Yay. Okay, we're doing good so far. Now we have new accreditation bodies coming in, for-profit and soon to be non-for-profit, that are looking at the provider level. Okay, what are they going to have to look at? Not a bad thing. This is how it works. Okay, now this is it, minimum quality. Now you turn around and what are the providers doing? They're facing needing to ensure maximum integrity, right? So this is our current landscape right now. So what I'm going to talk about today is that I feel that to even begin to address what we're facing here, we must take a three-pronged approach. One, mutually agree upon the need for a risk-driven approach when conceptualizing individualized supports. Two, understand how a risk-driven approach differs from traditional risk-benefit analyses. And three, establish related enhanced best practice standards for those in need. And this is real important, regardless of age, race, ethnicity, socioeconomic status, gender, severity, or service setting. And to achieve these aims, our first question needs to be whether or not we have a shared understanding for our current professional landscape and the related implications for this, I feel, and my colleagues feel. So here's our landscape, right? Here we are. Yay. Wait. Uh-oh. Where are we? Okay, so I can tell you this sure is not where we were when Gina Green was standing over my shoulder and I was working with an autistic child in 1998. Okay, let me just start there, okay? This is not where we were, and that's okay. That's not a bad thing, but this is our current professional landscape, all right? I joked with my husband earlier, I'm like, would it be funny if I said payers, providers, overseers? Oh my. I didn't know what the range would be, but I think everyone knows the Lions and Jack. So what did all of this likely tell us? When we're looking at this type of landscape, which doesn't even include the most important factor here, you know, the individual or the client, or the BACB's definition of client and stakeholder, that we need to also be asking ourselves, not only do we understand what's going on in our current practice landscape, but whether or not we're speaking the same language within that landscape. And I even at a glance that this slide, it demonstrates that we're likely far, far away from this, and it's far easier said than done to get us on the same page. So what's a regulatory authority? What are practitioner protections? What does it mean if something's profit or non-for-profit? Are all of these organizations based on a behavior analytic values-based foundation? And how does that interact with our stakeholder discussions about what's important to help this person have an improved quality of life? Because that's our job, right? So I'm going to say that it's not just the landscape, it's also our language. And I'll take a step back first, and I will address the landscape a little bit more. When I was thinking about whether or not we're on the same landscape, our crew, Kaba, did not have to look too far. These are two reviewers, and I need to take a moment to clarify. Fortunately, I already told my mentor last night that I was mortified that it took 23 years after my first ABAI. An invited speaker, and I was going to give a talk with no data. I don't know how many people know Dr. Michelle Wallace, but this kind of sucks. But I have data. Let me clarify. We have a ton of data. I just know it's going to take 50 minutes for you all to know why the data is important. All right. So I'll explain some of that later. I'm only making that joke right now because I also was very heavily trained that we would never air our dirty laundry. All right. You're not going to show reviewer comments when you're in the process. Let me tell you. So clearly I must have changed a lot because I'm just putting them right up there, okay? But let me tell you why. Back in the day, our reviewer comments, I think at one point I might have been the youngest, most published female in Java, just because of you, I think. Just like, I mean, it didn't mean that many articles. It was just because I was like 12. I mean, 12 years old, not even 20. But back then, our arguments in our journals were, okay, should it have been a concurrent or a non-concurrent multiple baseline? Do we feel that our percent integrity was good, or our IOA, or did you use the right calculation, right? I'm showing these reviews because I think we have a problem. So the top one you can glance at, I'm not trying to sound super cool. It was lovely. You hope to get these. They were very excited. This is an incredible approach. The bottom is a reviewer for a major behavior analytic practice journal. One that might be supported by where we're at. Behavior analytic practice journal. This reviewer said that it was a question as to whether or not autism services or services for autistic people, specifically ABA, was being covered by insurance. This is one of 3 separate reviews of 3 different papers over the last 3 years where we've had 2 reviewers and we have seen something akin to this. One even went so far as to say that it would be a stain on the journal for the journal not to publish someone's work. And the other said that it would be a stain on the journal for them to publish this. And again, it wasn't about the data. They were representing whether or not we're speaking the same language right now about our science and about our professional practice and landscape. So I'm very scared, all right? So I apologize, Dr. Wallace, all right? But hopefully I'm making my point is that I don't think that we have a shared understanding right now, and that's worrying me, all right? Why is it worrying me? Because now if we're gonna talk about whether or not we're speaking the same language, so that was clearly demonstrating that we are not on the same page about our professional practice landscape. I told the editor about that about a year ago, and he was surprised, but that is what it is. So first, it is a whole new world. And we need to realize that there is a recent shift, hopefully everyone knows, to define ABA as medically necessary, which places all stakeholders within the medical model, right? And this transition requires dedicated attention. We need to determine how this transition might adjust ways that we used to do things, right? Like, what are the influences here that are going to happen? So for example, in the medical model, symptoms or diagnostic criteria of a medical condition, right? They only matter on the extent to which those symptoms pose a risk, specifically a risk of death, okay? So the medical treatment, therefore, the medical model and treatment with respect to the medical model is based on strategies to decrease symptoms, right? So symptom reduction to reduce your risk. I'm cool with that. Sounds good. There's a tumor, you can engage in treatment, you can measure the size of the physiological tumor, you are reducing my risk of death. Okay, cool. That's not what we're doing, okay? We're a medically necessary service, but our target is not just a physiological measure, it's behavior and environment, okay? And if we take a symptom reduction approach, we're gonna be in a whole host of problems, and I think that might be what's happening. So my main goal today is to orient you to the value associated with instead approaching socially meaningful case conceptualization in ABA, according to instead saying, what are the individualized risks to an improved quality of life? It sounds simple, but I can guarantee you, based on several years of work here, it's producing some massive, massive changes in our practice, and it's been very exciting. So how do we effectively adapt to the new language, the new landscape, and ensure that we're speaking the same language? Well, I'm saying I believe that we need to reconceptualize risk. Why? Because we need to acknowledge that as ABA providers, the biggest risk to us, right, would be us failing. Let's be clear on that, all right? And when I say failing, it doesn't just mean that we failed to give someone a successful experience with ABA or we failed to improve quality of life. Failure can mean we're causing harm, okay? So that's our biggest risk. We need to operate every day with respect to what is the biggest risk and how is what we're doing decreasing risk to us successfully providing successful ABA services. Got it. So let's reconceptualize risk to look at that, all right? Because in the end, while a lot of great work is being done right now to protect against harm, our crew in particular got really, really worried because we realized that a vast majority of the efforts, and in particular credentialing and certification, but this is their jobs. I'm not worried that they're doing the wrong thing. Let me clarify. The job of credentialing and certification is to look at what we're doing with respect to our procedures and our outcomes. That is it. Our procedures and our outcomes. That is where they're looking at us with respect to credentialing and certification, all right? I need us to all realize that because there is far limited attention to what we all need to define as socially meaningful case conceptualization. I'm gonna explain that more throughout the day. So why does any of this matter, all right? Because bottom line is success with children, all right, it's going to equal increased funding for all and a decreased need for adult services. And as someone who's dedicated 25 years of my career to going across ages and supporting adults, if this happens, I'm cool with being out of a job. All right, let me be clear. All right, let me just say that loud and clear right now. I'm all in on whatever the local, I will go start bagging groceries with my 18-year-old down the street and I'll be totally excited. Every day I'll be like, how's it going, dude? Like, I'll be like, we did it, okay? So I'm not worried, okay? I'm really, really worried though, because if we fail with children, and this is important, is that we need to realize it's decreased funding for all and it's an increased need to help adults. ABA is the way to help. It is the way to help. I didn't say ABA, I meant to say the way to help, okay? And so if we don't understand what it is, obviously, and if we don't protect against this, we're gonna have a serious problem. Serious problem. So maybe that obsolete quote was right. It makes me sad, okay? So it reminds me of a phenomenon that we saw in our practice when we started. I was on the phone with parents. I've told the story a few times. I'm sorry for those of you who have to hear it multiple times, and I don't mean to keep being like way back in the day, but it's just a fact, okay? When I was on the phone with parents 25 years ago, there was two types, all right? There was the ones who had no idea what ABA was and we knew exactly what to say to them. And then there was the ones that were opposed. And back then it was definitely way more often based on misinformation or misconception and not for good reason. Okay, and I'm just going with the facts. There wasn't enough people going through treatment. Okay, you should be opposed to something if you experience something and it was harmful. Let me just clarify that, but let's get back to today. So those were the two parents. We knew exactly what to say to the ones who had no idea, and we knew exactly what to say to the ones that were opposed to wanting this to happen. When we started CABA, I was getting calls from parents, and they were in their children were typically in their early 20s, and usually the service coordinator, regional center system in California, or somebody else would say, hey, I want you talking to Dr. Taylor, and I'd get on the phone and they'd say, listen, I'm honored to be, it was very nice, so excited to talk to you, I've heard wonderful things, but hey, I'm worried. It's the Center for Applied Behavior Analysis, and we did ABA before. These are the quotes up there in the right, okay? We did ABA before, and it was nice. That sure wasn't one of those two categories. Okay, hold on. It was nice, we enjoyed our experience, but we need something new. And consistently, every parent that I talked to, when I dug a little bit deeper, I realized real quick what was going on. They thought we were gonna come in and sit at their kitchen table and run discrete trials with their 23-year-old, right? So something is happening, okay? We know that, I've known that a long time. Many of the people in the room have known that a long time, all right? I believe that is why we're seeing this. That is clearly a misunderstanding of the definition of ABA in terms of even the practitioners in that scenario, all right? This also happened when I was mentioning me getting those increased invites. I realized then that I had been talking a lot about the goal of ABA to be to bridge the chronological to functional age gap. So I don't know how many quote unquote early intervention providers there are here, but when I was a professor, that's how we would explain it to the new students coming in and teaching them how to conduct a parent intake. We would say, look, you wanna say your child is 6 years old, we're gonna do all of these tests. And these tests are going to tell us that while they're chronologically 6, they're functionally 3, and here's all the areas of the difference. And now we're going to build a bunch of goals, and our job is to bridge the gap, right? ABA 101, everyone's with me? Cool. That's not the same as you get older. And I'm starting to question if we need to look at that for kids too, to be honest, okay? But the main thing is what I've been saying for a while now as we've worked on this work. The bridging the chronological to functional age gap is valuable the extent to which it decreases future risk. And I mean risk to an improved quality of life, right? This is what we need to be thinking about here. That's our job. So our goal is not necessarily always to bridge the gap. It should be if that decreases risk for this individual in their scenario. So much like procedures don't equal ABA, a paradigm shift requires more than a procedural tool or a decision model, especially those designed to produce a fixed service intensity or a modality type, right? So what's needed? Our colleagues and my colleagues and I feel that it's an evidence-based conceptual framework, which creates a standardized mode for clinical practice recommendations, while simultaneously promoting transparency, agreement, accountability across all stakeholders. What's a potential risk indicator to this? Oh, one more article, I'll make it quick. This isn't a reviewer. This just came out in a journal. And it was the last paragraph, and I was completely floored, freaked out, and I still am. And this is another sign of how much I've changed. Love my mentor, but she sure told me if an author is wrong, we're going to put their name up there, the year, and we're going to go. Okay. And I just feel kind of guilty saying something bad, but at the same time, I'm like, no, we need to see this. This is a problem. This article, which was about crisis, risk is not just about crisis. Okay, it was a fine risk tool for crisis. Okay, it was a risk mitigation article recently came out. The tool itself, I loved. They had great stats on how they took all the reviewers through the tool. Do you agree with this tool? And I'm reading all of it, and I'm thinking, well, if I just saw the tool too, I would be one of their people, so they can show me their data that had a high social validity. Did all the reviewers of the tool read what you were going to write? Because you, or the reviewers of the journal, because y'all ended this article by saying this. In finding many ABA service providers unprepared for the pandemic, it was crisis, but still, let's read this. Perhaps the pandemic has reminded practitioners of the importance of least restrictive interventions, generalization of training, and a focus on socially valid treatment goals. What were they doing before? How am I the only person reading this article right now being really worried about what they were doing before? Something's going on. So got through your state of affairs. We're good. I depressed you, not cool. Let me depress you more. Okay. When we're talking about socially meaningful case conceptualization, we're talking about ensuring a model that allows for practitioners to further elevate individualized ABA assessment and treatment dosages, moving beyond identified deficits alone, necessitating equally robust empirical analyses of all available and necessary supports towards ensuring optimal outcomes. Risk analysis is important. It needs to happen at the point of procedures, but that's not what we're talking about. In some of my previous presentations, I have a whole slide defining analysis versus approach. I also go risk versus risky. I'm putting some Tom Cruise, but we got to go today, so let's keep going. We feel strongly that the number one risk facing our future or us being obsolete in 5 years is socially meaningful case conceptualization. And as I mentioned earlier, this is especially concerning given the current focus on procedures and outcomes alone. So that's that image that I'm showing you there on the right now. That is where they're at. They're not doing the wrong thing. That's their job. But how are we ensuring that we're doing all three of these things? Okay, because it's not just those two. How did this come to a moment for us? It was fun. My earlier talk today, I'll give a QR code later. That was more about me freaking out when I was very worried watching The Mandalorian. And there was a moment where he's like, don't worry if you're not a Star Wars fan. And it's like factions fighting against each other. The monster's coming. And Mando's like, you can, because if we fight amongst ourselves, the monster will kill us all. And I was like, oh no, it's my field. All right, so that started. Okay, so my work. Okay, I laughed with my colleagues for it was somebody else who actually gave I think it's like Oppenheimer or something, which made it even more fun when we realized that it was Jurassic Park. All right, not some famous philosopher who said your science were so preoccupied with figuring out if they could, they never asked if they should. And in this moment, I kind of realized I'm going to put my little Dr. Seuss twist on it. So this is me at the bottom. And just when we knew we could, we leapt to whether we are. But if we're still not asking if we should, we simply will not get far. Or depending on the audience, since there's so few of you today, I'll give you my other one. Who the fuck do we think we are? Okay, cool, right? As I previously mentioned, when orienting us all to the BACV's more comprehensive use of the term risk, we need to realize the behavior analysts view behavior and environment as inseparable, right? So as such, risk-benefit analyses must extend beyond a particular procedure or component to instead encompass a broader framework of risk, specifically risk to an improved quality of life, or worded differently, to a successful experience with ABA. With this, socially meaningful case conceptualization requires attention across all three to protect against a symptom reduction approach to service delivery. I'm going to jump on, but I see a photo, so I'll wait. She's been feisty lately. You don't know. A detailed account of this image is not possible. Not like she can't call me any day and get the photo. I know you're all going to want to take it in, so you can glance up. I just want to say, and again, this is where Michelle told me I should have my laser and identify each one. I hope you can all see it at a distance. Just for today, I'm putting it up here with the intention only of further highlighting the need for a dramatic perspective shift. You are looking at the medical model. So someone's coming in to a medical model with a physiological condition. I'm not saying medical doctors aren't interested in helping socially meaningful case conceptualization. Again, their targets and their measures and their procedures are different. Versus when we're looking at ABA and socially meaningful case conceptualization. So we're not medical doctors treating physiological symptoms and measuring our progress based on changes in physiology. Identifying, evaluating, and clinically programming with respect to individualized risk exposure and related risk indicators, bottom line, proves extremely useful given the clear emphasis on avoiding recommendations based on symptom reduction alone, right? And this in turn increases the likelihood for our adherence, which also, believe it or not, I don't know who was involved in the code update, but we're required to take a functional contextual approach, but yes, it's exciting, versus isolated topographical analyses, all right? It is different. So to not only survive, but thrive, we must ensure that we're prepared for this transition. Typically, when we see concerns in our field, we have a tendency to jump to, let's increase our education, let's increase our training, we got it, our supervision standards, our practices, that's that dreaded little box there at the bottom. I spent much of the last 25 years in that dreaded box, it's tough. I have a ton of empathy for my professor colleagues, a ton of empathy for my department chair colleagues and then creditors and everything that's going on there. And I agree, we are going to need to address, if anyone in this room agrees with what we're talking about today, we're going to have to hit it at training and education. I also know that's going to take a long time. And I can tell you right now, we need immediately accessible resources to ensure that we're engaging in appropriate socially meaningful case conceptualization. And those resources need to not be too complicated. They can't be expert reliant. And they can't be too costly. They have to be scalable. And I'm telling you this as a family-based company owner with over 200 employees, including 25 BCBAs, and half of them are PhDs because I love them all, so I have to pay them way more. Okay, so I'm telling you, they have to be scalable as well. And they have to be teaching the skills that we need. And right now there's some amazing articles. I don't know what everyone's background in the room is, but one article came out on outcome measures and I worshipped it. And it was so great. And it was brilliant about all the meta contingencies and play and interlocking contingencies and how we needed to motivate and change some of the MOs. And I understood all of it. I loved it. I'm looking at 25 BCBAs and handing them that article and thinking they're turn around tomorrow and protect more against harm. Not happening. So it is complicated what's out there. We need something that is language that we can all understand. So doing so requires us tackling several barriers. These are just two examples. In a moment, I'll talk about the domains here. I'm going to go faster now, all right? I just want to say that most ABA providers are thinking that ABA is just right up there in that characteristics box. So they're right up there in that box and they're saying, we're coming in, we're identifying what the challenging behavior is, what the preferences are, what the potential skill deficits are, and we're going to put our little programming in. And we'll take supplementary measures from these other domains, which by the way, took us over 2 years, a dozen BCBAs, 7 PhDs, 2 state chapter presidents, 3 journal reviewers, 3 policy committee members. So we got a pretty good representative group that worked on having to change the domains. And we all realized that most people are thinking clinical programming's up there. That little map on the side view is just one example. That gives you your kind of basic, we're going into our teaching procedures, here's what we're doing. And these are supplementary measures that we're doing. ABA is not in that little box on the right corner, all right? It is not just in that, and we have a problem here, all right? And without a foundation that orients us to services to without a foundation that orients services to overall risk and risk mitigation, we're gonna have a problem with case conceptualization, primarily because everyone involved in a scenario for an individual is not necessarily gonna agree, right? So they're gonna interpret needs differently. So let's say it's a month of services and someone has severe problem behavior and it decreases dramatically. The payer might be like, great, we know 100% we're good to go, right? There's success. The parent is like, I'm terrified. It can reoccur. I don't feel trained, okay? So we can't just look at this behavior measure unlike the size of the tumor, if you're with me. Bottom line, ABA practitioners are required to determine appropriate service goals and related service recommendations without any universally agreed upon industry standards for doing so. This was the first image that was released about the RDA a couple of years ago. I'll explain it quickly. This is a fact. We have a ton of research to back every single one of those tools and procedures in that little part there in the middle. Everyone sees that, right? I'm not saying you need, I'm not endorsing anyone. I'm just kind of throwing some out there. People use the Vineland, EFA, right? Or EF's, I don't know how you say, excuse me. Well, that's in there too. VB map, whatever. These are our assessment tools. We do not have a process in our field right now as to how to summarize the results of all of these things in a way that can directly inform our recommendations. And we do not have a common language for that. What I'm trying to suggest to you guys today is that when we look at this and shift it to the risk lens, we have an opportunity now to say we can take the outcomes of all of these things and we can now say, are we looking at a low risk, a moderate risk, or a high risk? All right. And what's important about that is that that's the only way that we can have all of our assessment outcomes directly relate to our service recommendations in terms of these little things called, you know, intensity and format, like hours and location and numbers of tiers and all of these things that we're trying to figure out in a bubble with all of these numbers that don't relate. Oh no, we don't need to do that. Translating assessment outcomes into corresponding risk levels is one vital step in the direction of being able to ensure that we have progress and outcome measures that make sense given all of the different evidence-based practices that we're doing and that can be talked about across all stakeholders. Because they don't know your VB-MAP levels like you do, but that one pair does, and you love talking to her. Okay. The risk-driven approach serves as a foundation to comprehensive ABA services from initial patient referral through discharge. All right, so I'm going to go quickly through some of these. My job is not to sell anything today. We don't have a product. Okay, this is an approach that we're doing. Okay. What it does is it provides a structured approach to the practitioners to be able to determine and monitor ABA services delivery impact for an individual, again, regardless of age or diagnosis of service setting. During intake, the approach is described to the parent, all right, as an effective communication tool, or I shouldn't say parent, whoever is involved in that person's circle of supports and the payers and the providers, so all stakeholders, to establish a shared understanding for the assessment process and how that relates to service recommendations. Apparently, some people think you just need to get the assessment done so you can start services. Okay, anyway, B, ensure mutually agreed upon service goals. And C, clarify expectations for service delivery. Here's a framework, it's just a quick glance. The framework is our main thing. We used to call it the matrix. In a moment, I'll walk you through the domains a little bit more. And what the framework does is by sitting down, I mean, actually with the parent, all right, but also with payers, also with providers, we do this quite a bit, showing them a framework, saying, no, we're not just in our characteristics box over here. It allows us to answer these questions. Is it possible to deliver services? If services are needed, what is the necessary delivery format and intensity? Are ABA services working? And if not, what needs to be adjusted? I know it's a lot to take in, all right? You get the idea quickly at a glance of saying safety, resources, characteristics, efficacy. These are the type of measures. These are measures that practitioners are doing all the time right now. I will show you in a moment. Feel like an ad campaign. It's easier when you look at one at a time. I am not endorsing a single one of these, all right, or not endorsing them. I just decided to throw on commonly used ones. We did a retreat 2 months ago, 20 something BCBAs across 2 days, and I put them all in a room and I assigned them to 4 groups. And I said, y'all worked at a bunch of agencies before you came to CABA. Cool. I need you to go be with the other smart people, and I need you all to sit down and tell me, if you were to look at the current battery of tools that you use, there's only a few payers that require just this one or just that one, right? And I'm an odd agency owner. I actually wanted to respect their certification and not insist that they follow just this one curriculum or just this one tool, okay? So I want to clarify that. I know it can be confusing for people when they hear me speak. And I'm even an author on the almighty skills. Yet I still wanted people to be able to use the tools that they thought would be right for the individual, because they're accessing a more seasoned clinician and can get ongoing mentorship and support in the model that we've created in my company, okay? So they can come to me with any tool, and as long as it's evidence-based and agreed upon by the practice community as being evidence-based and is employed on a regular basis, and as long as we can translate it to risk, we're gonna use it because it fits in here, okay? I'll show you in a moment. So in other words, all of these different tools, we can now say, okay, we're looking at the results of our assessments in this domain, and we can answer the question of how do safety concerns influence risk to an improved quality of life, risk to a successful ABA experience. I can go on. I can now look at my resources. For a while, I had to remind the supervisors at CABA, it's not just all about the telehealth feasibility assessment. Like, yes, that is a resource. It's one of our resources. There's a bunch of other resources that go into play, you know, like the parent schedule. Okay, and that is not some supplementary measure or supplementary piece of data or information that you now need to fit into whatever you just figured out on the characteristics. It is a risk. If there is something that is there that's going to impact what you figured out over here, all kind of together, all right? Similarly, well, this is the big one. I'm not denying there's a lot more tools and procedures in this one, right? A lot more. Think of any approach to functional analysis, think of any approach to preference assessment, think of any approach to looking at skills. Everyone's with me a little bit. I got some nods, we're getting the idea. Cool, I'm gonna keep going. Last one, efficacy. How do threats to efficacy influence risk? Okay, now we're looking at all of the procedures we're doing to ensure that the tools and the procedures that we're using are the right ones for who we're working with, okay? All right, I went a little faster than yours because I got more feisty on the other points, so that's okay. I'll re-record this later, but we had some good little subcategories. I just didn't read them to you. In the end, I just want to jump to some of our research. So it's easier sometimes to look at it like this because it applies across things. I'm sorry, did you mind getting some water? I would be Dr. Colombo, not really. And I apologize. I'm not trying to be judgy that there's like, 15 people here that I'm like, that's okay. I'm just going to stop. Sorry. This is the framework as well. What's really valuable to look at it this way is when you see that it applies across stakeholders too. So, and this took us a while with my team. I had to start it just with respect to the client or the individual we're supporting because everyone was getting like, this is too much, it's too new. And I'm like, let's keep simplifying. And so we have a lot of research protocols that are surrounding this because we actually look at each one of these domains across all stakeholders because these things vary. I actually went through an incredibly meaningful moment with my own son, thank you, who I often like to say just came home early from college, right? He just had to come home early, that's it, not had to, just help me, okay? And we decided to sit down and have a little RDA discussion, okay? And we went through what the risks are to his quality of life. And I gotta tell you, 25 years of doing this, and it never occurred to me in a million years that that would make the interaction so much more productive. Because even when a moment happened that I was frustrated with what he was saying, I realized, well, hold on, what are my preferences? My preferences are that I produce children that contribute to society. Okay. That's clearly not his preferences right now. Okay. But whatever program we put in place right now to help with his significant mental health concerns, which he is the first to say comes from being in a symptom reduction ABA program, because we came home one day and there was a little magazine on the table and I knew what program had been going on. Yeah. Because I was holding him in my arms when I defended my dissertation. So it's a little weird when he's in services at age, later on. So I saw the magazine, so I asked him, hey, what were you guys working on? And he said, I don't know. I just saying me, how did this person feel? How did they feel? And I was like, oh, what'd you say? He's like, happy, excited, scared. And I was like, all right, was that helpful? Since clearly there might be some perspective taking problems, or at least I hope you're not going to beat anybody else up, or there was those 4 principles you were kicked out of. How did that work? Was that helpful? I guess, except I don't really know how they feel, Mom. I mean, they're all actors, models. Yeah. We have a problem with our case conceptualization. We also are looking at this model across our staff as well. So it makes it easy if there's any providers in the room. We all know if we don't have common language across admin and clinical, it causes a lot of issues, right? We realize quickly when we jump in with a client, we know there's risk indicators because they have a diagnosis, which means that there are symptoms. Bottom line, we just don't want to be a symptom reduction approach, right? But we know you have to have symptoms across these different things to get the diagnosis, okay? But we're gonna out the gate say, well, hold on, what are the risk indicators to an improved quality of life? I'm not jumping right in and saying, what are your symptoms? I'm saying, what are the risk indicators to an improved quality of life, which yes, will involve symptoms, and yes, there might be symptom reduction, but it changes the narrative. That's what the RDA does for us when we go through the 4 domains. Now we can move towards optimal outcomes. We realize real quick, it's helpful with staff as well. Although I know that maybe all organizations are not operating at optimal outcomes, we should be, and we should say that we are, and we are. So we start there. When a risk indicator pops up, a staff performance problem, we can now engage with those 4 domains to say, is this resources, is it safety, is it efficacy, or is it characteristics? Recently, we had a problem with a billable requirement. Shocker, supervisors weren't happy with the practitioners. Yeah, it's a fun conversation. It was interesting because the executive team thought we had described it very, very well, okay? And it was not getting described well. And most people would have thought that we would have immediately said, okay, it's an efficacy problem, right? Okay, it's efficacy, meaning we're not having integrity with the statement that was supposed to be disseminated to the staff, okay? And I was like, no. And then someone else was like, oh, it's a characteristics problem, right? That must be what it is. They just don't like the billable requirements, not their preferences. And I was like, no. It was actually a resources problem. When I really did a good RDA on it, and it might not be the way you think of it, I realized that we should not have these 4 people trying to get these 10 people to go tell it to these 35. We needed to boil it down to another 6 people. We had too many. So technically efficacy, yes, but by us having to go through the conversation and go through the domains, we were able to proceed past a lot of symptom reduction that we do with our own staff, right? A lot of it. So in the end, the RDA is only valuable to the extent to which we have a shared understanding for the defining features of the science of behavior analysis. So I do not want to diminish that we need to continue to focus our efforts here in that bottom corner, okay? Some work that Dr. Colombo and my colleagues and I did made it very clear that we have a significant problem with our training and education. I'm also way over here in the provider box, so I want to make sure that we're focusing on having immediately accessible, scalable resources, and that's what we've designed, and I was honored to share some of it with you today. I'm not going to go through the last quote because we're getting short on time. I probably can't stop myself, but y'all seem to really like that moment when I showed you that there was a reviewer that thought insurance wasn't covering autism treatment. This is a reviewer that didn't understand what we meant when we were saying science and wanted to lecture us, which we appreciated the lecture, but boy, was it disturbing when they said, we don't think there should be a united front in science because science requires that we are looking at new concepts and new ideas and we're being open to new data. Pretty sure that's the definition of ABAI. We realized that this person was defining science just with respect to our research studies and not that which defines the science of behavior analysis, which is both our approach in natural science and what that means and what we're doing when we're saying behavior is a function of environment, and now what we're talking about in terms of socially meaningful case conceptualization. When we changed this article to instead say, it was the monster article, that our monster is, I said anti-science, when I then changed it and said the monster's case conceptualization, the article reads pretty well. So clearly we have a problem with our reviewers having an understanding that when we say science, we're not just referencing the studies, that's one component, we're also referencing how we're required to engage in a natural science approach, right? Skepticism, the 7 dimensions are not just for kiddos with ABA, that is our job. Future work, if you're interested in this, I know I went a minute over, you can follow us for looking at the domains of behavior analysis and trying to work with some of our professor friends and say, maybe we need to start looking at teaching these a little bit differently. So there's only a few people in the room that could glance at this and understand where I'm going. I had originally spent more time on this, but it was fun to be able to go off on a few tangents, trying to read a few people's eyes behind the mask. So in the end, I just want to thank you all very much for being here. And earlier, I did mention another talk that I gave that got some more into all the issues that are happening now. So that is a barcode. We'll try and get that recording up of that earlier talk if you are more interested in the context matters and what's happening right now. It really leads as a prelude to this. So feel free to take that. I'll make the same joke I made earlier, although this talk was a little different, but I said, I did dedicate that one to Feda and Mu, and I said it was easy for me to wrap up that one because I realized that Feda would have wrapped it all up by saying, Rachel, did you just spend 20 minutes telling everyone that y'all need to knock off all the crap in your personal life so you can focus on helping people? And I was like, yeah, I'm pretty much, that's all I just said. And for today, I'm gonna say, Rachel, did you just spend 20 minutes telling everyone that they need to figure out exactly what they need to be working on before they just jump in and start working on it? Yeah, Feda, pretty much sure that's all I just said. Thank you guys very much.